there, welcome to the City Rev Life podcast. My name is Justin. I'm sitting here with Pastor Roby. How you doing today, Pastor Roby?
Oh, I'm great. How are you, Pastor Justin?
I'm doing great. Excited for this conversation. We're kicking off a new series today.
Yes.
And we're having a series of conversations that I really just want to set up by maybe just kicking it over to you as far as maybe introduce the content we're going to explore and answer the question, why? Why are we talking about this?
Yep. So we actually talked in our Sunday services this past week on where we're at as basically a culture, society, and where we will be in the coming year. So at the time of this recording, we are about a year away from being in full swing in preparation for a major election that will take place in November 2024. And so just kind of projecting out, what do we as Christians need to be prepared for as we are entering into an election cycle?
Yeah.
And so we spent some time talking a little bit about that on the message. We'll link that in this in the podcast notes that you can check out as kind of an introduction, but wanted to take a deeper dive into this series.
Yeah.
So the main idea of this series is how to walk through an election cycle with your soul intact. So we're not talking about the political issues, political candidates.
Yeah.
This is not just another podcast or another place for political commentary. This is more about shepherding your soul, thinking through how does our relationship with the Lord look through a cycle like this, and some of those kinds of subject matters. Because it affects relationships, it affects spiritual health, mental health, emotional health. All of those things can be affected in a political season. So we're going to be talking about that, how to stay healthy with our souls. Yeah,
and implicit in the way that you titled that is the idea that a political season can be detrimental to your soul. If you aren't watchful, if you aren't careful, it has the potential to do that. And so maybe just to start us off, why is it? Why is politics? Why can't it be something that as Christians we need to be mindful of, watchful over, look carefully how we walk, as it says in Ephesians 5, when it comes to this particular area?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is what really prompted us to do this series is thinking through the last election, there were many that came forward in our church family, mature, seasoned believers that were asking their spiritual leaders, their small group leaders, their ministry leaders, their pastors and ministers are just saying, hey, man, this election has divided my family or lifelong friendships I don't speak to anymore, or I watch so much of the news and hear so much politics, like I'm just filled with anxiety and fear and just people just surfacing like I'm not in a good place. And so we want to be ready for that. So to answer your question, why, that's really what this first introductory episode is about, is that politics, I don't think we think about it like this, but politics makes for a really good idol. And it can become it can sneak up, and that's really how idolatry works. There's many well-meaning Christians, and I would say in every Christian's life, we love Jesus, worship Jesus, God is our God, but idols sneak up on you.
Yeah.
And things, we're so made to worship. You were even sharing this earlier before we started the episode. We're so made to worship. That things sneak up on us, and they can all of a sudden, without realizing it, real Jesus-loving, God-fearing people, all of a sudden, other things, and it can be, it's not just politics, it can be success, it can be anything, can share the throne with Jesus.
Right.
And when those idols sneak up on us, that's when things, all of a sudden, we're not feeling those things that we're expecting to come with following Jesus, that purpose, that peace, that love, that joy, those fruit of the Spirit, those kinds of things. All of a sudden, we can feel that it's affecting our spiritual health.
Yeah, and maybe can you give a little bit of a definition, some basic words? What is an idol? What's idolatry? What does that mean?
Sure. Well, one definition for an idol is any good thing that becomes an ultimate thing. So anything that we are putting in the place of God. So, for example, someone's children can be an idol. And children are a wonderful blessing from the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
We're supposed to love them, pour love on them. But children can, if they become my sole purpose, if they become the centerpiece of my life, if they become my identity, my self-worth, then that's taking a beautiful, wonderful, good thing, some of the best things of life, and making that an ultimate thing. Career is a common idol. It can be my driving centerpiece of my life. It can be my identity, my self-worth, the reason I get up in the morning. Wealth, money is one of the most common idols that every Christian has to watch for. Ministry can become an idol.
Yeah.
All kinds of things can become an idol. It's
Right.
any good thing that becomes an ultimate thing.
Right. And you even have this religious, like, you sacrifice for the idol.
Sure.
You donate your time for the idol. You
Yes.
give everything, other things are put first. It becomes your first love.
Yes, absolutely.
So when it comes to politics as an idol, what you mentioned the statement that politics makes for a really good idol. We don't mean that idols are good, but
Right.
what makes politics such a potent idol?
Yes, I think there are certain things that are they really masquerade well as a false god.
Yeah.
And anything can, but there are some things that do just really, they're just notorious idols.
Mm-hmm.
Let me give another example first before politics, because I think
Yeah.
it will help, because I'm not trying to pick on this particular idol, but money is one of those. And Jesus nails that. He says, you can't serve both God and money. He's saying that because money masquerades like a god. Because listen, money can provide security.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if I have enough money, I'll be safe.
Right.
But that's not true. Money is not that strong. Money can immediately go away without us causing that to happen. Money can give me self-worth. I can buy things that can make me feel worthy. Money can bring pleasure. Money can bring purpose. There are so many things that really only God can do that money does. So money is such a common idol. Politics is another one of those that is really masquerades as an idol, and we have to be really, really careful about it. Let me give you some examples. 5, and there's probably more, but here's some things to look at. Politics can, with a particular candidate or a particular philosophy, politics can masquerade as a provider. So someone can think if a particular candidate wins, or a particular party or a particular philosophy, if that wins, it guarantees greater provision for me.
Yeah.
And that's on both sides and all parts of the political spectrum. So, and there's some, in the same way there's some truth with money. There's wise practices of money that can provide saving for a rainy day. But my ultimate expectation of provision is not from money; it's from God.
Right.
In the same way, there is wisdom in politics that can provide for certain spheres and certain sectors of society. At the same time, that is not where my ultimate provision comes.
Right.
In the same way with security, politics can promise security. Hey, if this party wins, everything goes down the tubes. If this party wins, everything is saved. And so we can feel that our security and our safety is dependent completely on our politics. That's not where our ultimate security comes from. Our ultimate security comes from God.
Yeah.
God can overcome. I mean, all politics are easily in his hands. So our security comes from God. Identity. Our identity can come from politics. Someone could say, I am a Democrat, or I am a Republican, or I'm a conservative, or I'm a liberal, or I'm an independent, or anything in between. It can become an identity, but ultimately nothing can give our identity beyond, in a greater capacity than the one who made us and renames us. 2 more. Politics can be the ultimate framework of good versus evil. And that's a spiritual category. So it can feel like politics is the ultimate narrative of good versus evil. My party is the good, trying to overcome the other party, which is the bad. But God tells us there is a higher battle that is not of this world, that is the ultimate a narrative of good versus bad. Lastly, and I think this is one of the most important ones, politics can easily masquerade as the thing we're putting our hope in.
Mm.
So we can think about the hope for our city, our state, our community. We can put our hope in politics, that
Yeah.
if politics wins, that is where our hope is. But that is not where our hope is. Our hope is in Jesus Christ, who overcame the grave. He is our living hope. He defeated death, and he reigns for all time. And so
Yeah.
that is ultimately where our hope is. Politics can sneak up and share the throne in our lives by being a good thing that becomes an ultimate thing.
Yeah. One of the other things that comes to mind as you talk about identity, how politics can become this identity for us, is it also can create this community that we feel like, now I
Yes.
belong to this community. I am a part of this party. And the challenge with that is when that gets elevated above and beyond your Christian identity as a
Yes.
follower of Jesus, your citizenship is out of whack,
Yeah.
right? Our citizenship first being as those who are citizens of heaven. And what I'm hearing you say in that definition of an idol can be a good thing that we make ultimate, of saying some of these things like, yes, God gives us wisdom for having just systems.
Yes.
That no doubt, if you're a Christian and you're engaging in some level in the city or in the state in some way, you're going to want to implement those and do those in a way that honors the Lord and is fueled by God's wisdom. But that good thing becomes an ultimate thing when we see that as our ultimate hope, that everything will rise and fall depending on the result of this election.
Yes.
And it's as if we've completely excluded the higher King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who is sovereign and working over and
Yes.
through all of it.
Yeah, working, and he's not separate. He's working through it. The Bible is explicit in Romans 13. There is no ruler or authority except by God.
Yeah.
Proverbs is clear. Every ruler and authority, kings, their hearts are in the hands of God.
Right.
And he's channeling that. And how all that works, I don't know, because there's some really wicked leaders, but that God calls, holds accountable.
Yeah.
So how all that works, we don't know. But what we do know is Jesus is very actively reigning and ruling down into the details of our society. And his reign and rule over our lives is the primary framework that then influences everything else.
That's good. And so so if that's kind of what makes politics such a potent idol and a temptation for us to worship, what are the, if you could describe, what are the challenges for Christians as we're thinking about engaging as being
Sure.
citizens of the United States in our context, as first and foremost citizens of heaven? What do we need to watch out for in terms of how should we engage? Or how shouldn't we, I should say, too?
Yep, absolutely. So I think there are two ways that politics can show up as an idol, two primary ways. Maybe this is like a continuum. But on one side, it is total separation. So it would be like, hey, I've got my faith here and I've got my politics here. They're just two separate boxes. And my faith doesn't really influence my politics at all.
Yeah.
That would then be kind of like politics is sharing a throne with Jesus. So like Jesus in my life should influence everything I do. It influences every relationship. It influences how I go to work. It influences all parts of me. There's no parts that is off limits for Jesus. So my relationship with Jesus should influence my politics. And I should, on mission for Jesus, be doing his work through things like how I vote. The other extreme is syncretism. So it is over-blending my faith with my politics. It's not Jesus is first and he's influencing my politics. It's the syncretism of the two. It's the blending of the two. And just to define that word really quickly, syncretism is the term for when faiths get blended together.
Yeah.
A common example of that would be, at least in the Caribbean context, South Florida context, Santeria or voodoo, where a lot of times you'll see like a blending of the Catholic faith with an animistic religion. And so you have like almost like a witchcraft with under a facade or under the labels of like Catholic saints.
Right.
And so it's a blending of those two. That's a historic example of two things that get blended. Politics and faith get blended often, and that's historically true. That's why so many emperors and pharaohs and kings were worshipped as gods or demigods.
Yes.
It's because politics and faith can get blended together. And so when those things get confused, when I have a political, and it can get to a place where my politics are then influencing my faith, and where it seems like those two things are completely blended, that is another form of idolatry.
Yeah. So then we need to watch out for not completely compartmentalizing our faith from how we think politically, how we view certain issues, approach them. Our faith should inform how we approach those, as it does every other area of our life. And at the same time, we shouldn't overblend in a syncretistic way, confusing politics and religion as though they're this one thing altogether, and having them bleed into each other. And so then if those are kind of the two things we need to be cautioned against, what is the way forward? What are some, maybe can you preview some of what we'll talk about even in this series?
Yep, that's great. And I agree with that recap. Here's kind of where we're going. Some of the subjects that we've got to think about is, because it would be easy to say, I'm not doing either of those extremes. But I think it's important for our own faithfulness to Jesus, first of all, but also for our own spiritual health, to not just be like, no, I'm fine, and however I'm engaging politics is fine. No, like, let's let the scripture speak to us, correct, train, rebuke. Let's grow. So, and grow more in the image of Jesus. So these are the types of things we all should deeply be looking at in our lives. First one would be like, what is our first allegiance? Do we, the basic framework that we view society and the world, is it a political framework, either one party or the other, or is it first and foremost a biblical worldview? And if I can't differentiate the two, then that's a challenge, and we need to push into that. How do we then take a higher view of a biblical worldview and then critique over our politics? And if we have a political affiliation, if we're part of a political party, can we effectively critique our political party based on the biblical worldview and the gospel?
Right.
So for a first allegiance to Christ. Secondly is like looking at the fruit in our life. This is one of the most obvious ones, most helpful ones, and maybe the most neglected. The fruit of my engagement should, with the Lord, ultimately should be love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. If I'm not those things, if I'm not gentle, if I'm not self-controlled, if I'm not loving, I'm not full of joy, I'm not full of peace, on, well, then I'm reaping bad fruit.
Right.
So like that should be a warning sign. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll talk about hope. Like, what's my emotional state? We're going to talk about this in the series. Like, at the other end, the day after the election, if I'm overly elated and full of joy as if like it's the second coming, that's concerning. If I'm overly depressed and demoralized and have lost all hope, that's also concerning. And so kind of reading my emotional state for where my hope is. Lastly, relationships. What's the dividing line in my relationships? Is this what breaks down relation? Can I not overcome this difference? That's concerning, because I may be having the wrong first and foremost allegiance and the wrong first and foremost tribe. And we're going to talk about how Jesus does a miracle of unity.
That's great. And so then, if that's where we're kind of heading, that's what we hope to be able to discuss over the next several episodes. Just what would you leave us with today as we wrap up this first one?
So here's what I would say is, be willing to go on this journey authentically and on this very difficult, touchy subject. Just in the privacy of your relationship with the Lord, allow Him to speak and correct. And so I would just say, for the sake of your spiritual health and for the sake of your faithfulness before the Lord, is pray. And I would say two potential takeaways from today's episode. One is just pray and ask the Holy Spirit to reveal if there is either an over separation or an over blending, and if there's any idolatry there, and just consistently, maybe for this next week, pray and ask God to expose that idolatry in your heart, and to use the scriptures we're going to look at through this series to shape you. Second thing is, if you're very heavily involved in politics and you have a suspicion that there may be too much, or maybe you're just open to the possibility that it may be somewhat becoming an idol, consider fasting it. Consider fasting politics for a month, a couple months, a week. And if that seems absolutely unthinkable, now maybe you're a politician and you work for a politician and that like literally you can't for your job. but maybe there's a way you could fast some of what your intake is. Otherwise, if you are just a politically minded citizen, which is great, that's a good thing. But if you're worried it might be becoming more of an ultimate thing than you're comfortable with, then consider fasting. If that sounds unthinkable to fast politics or political engagement for a season, that's concerning. And I would say that should raise the alarm a little bit more, because we should be able to lay anything aside from the Lord down for a season of prayer and fasting.
Yeah, that's good. Well, we hope that either of those two applications, prayer, consider fasting, changing your news diet, political diet for a season, would be a helpful place to start as we begin having these conversations, learning together and looking to the scripture as our guide. Well, we hope that this has been helpful to you. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the City Rev Life podcast.
Thank you so much for listening to the City Rev Life podcast. Feel free to subscribe or leave a rate and review. If you want more content or additional resources, head to cityrev.org or download our app. We hope you have a great day.